to hearing what he says about the breath and the mind, meditation and the mindfulness of breathing. So over to you, Sthiramanas.
Thank you, Shantikara. I'll just get myself set up quickly. That's great. So, yes, hello from me. My name's Sthiramanas. Yes, I was really enjoying that meditation. I need to remember where I am for a second. So Shantikara has given us a really thorough summary, so I'll just sort of jump in to what I'm going to talk about. So one way that I'd heard quite soon after I started to learn to meditate is that meditation was working on the mind with the mind, which sounds nice and clear and straightforward. And then I realised that I didn't really know what that meant. I'm not sure. I definitely don't feel like I've got to the bottom of that either. I think there's a real depth to that phrase, that meditation is working on the mind with the mind. It's a bit like, I don't know, trying to. I've not got any metaphors. Paint a paintbrush with a paintbrush. I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with that. I think that my initial experience of learning to meditate, particularly doing this mindfulness of breathing practice, was that the mind was mostly something that seemed to get in the way, because I related to my mind as the thoughts that came into my head that would sort of be taking me somewhere other than the act of meditating, on the sort of emotions that might come up of things like, I really don't want to be meditating. All these things that seem to just get in the way of the breath and the technique. And so there was the technique and there was the mind that sort of seemed to get in the way of it. And I think that the problem with that is just it's too limited an understanding of what the mind is. I think we don't seem to have a suitable definition. There doesn't seem to be a single, clear, agreed upon definition of what the mind is. And I don't think that we can know it. I think, in fact, the part of being an unenlightened human being is wrapped up in that is the fact that we that we don't know the fullness of what the mind is. We don't know its breadth, its majesty. So we're stuck in a limited sense of what the mind is. So part of the overall goal of meditation is to really find out. And I think my experience of learning to meditate a bit more and practicing Buddhism is getting to know my mind a bit more, and getting to know how the mind works a bit more. And it's really sort of basic Buddhism 101, this point that the mind creates your experience. Yeah, so the mind comes in prior to what you experience. It comes in prior to the world that you experience. So basically, like if you're watching a film, you sit and watch a film and you just go through the whole thing and you take it as read. You're like, okay, these are the things that happened. And because it's film rather than paintings or something, you take it as rote, that's the reality. Of course, you've got a film director who's chosen everything that you see in what order. And in doing so, your experience of that is completely different to if a different film director had been there filming the same scenes at the same time and then editing it in a different way. Do you know what I mean? So there's a sort of the mind is there, sort of is the lens through which we experience the world. So I was recently on a solitary retreat for a couple of weeks at our retreat centre in Suffolk, Vidrossana, which was great. And I could notice I had the space to really notice myself get into a bad mood and what that's like. I could sort of see the initial things where I'd started to get bit grumpy. I started to tell myself that I was in a bad mood, which is one surefire way of creating a bad mood. Oh, I'm in such a bad mood. And sort of see that happening. I was able to watch the process of that happening a bit more. And when you're in it, you're just like, that. It's not. It doesn't even seem like I'm in a bad mood. It just seems like things just aren't going my way. It's raining outside. The last meal that I sweated over for an hour and a half actually wasn't very tasty. I'm struck, like I can't. My meditation's not going very well. And that becomes a reality. It's not that I'm sort of, although I can try and think of it in this way, my experience is one of things just aren't so good. And that is, it's not that that's an idea, it's not that that's a thought that I've laid on top of it, that is the world that I'm experiencing. Later in the retreat, I had a really good retreat, and sort of through the fruits of practicing a lot of meditation over a couple of weeks, it was really overcast for most of the retreat, and then the last few days the sky cleared and it was beautiful, and that certainly helps. I went for a walk, and I was in a state of sort of semi-ecstasy. The sun was going down and it was just really, really beautiful, that sort of golden hour with light coming in. And something had changed, and my mind changed as a result of it. And from that perspective, everything was joy. There was nothing that could have gone wrong. And I sort of know intellectually that when I'm in one situation, that the other is possible. I know that when I'm in a bad mood, it's not gonna last forever. I know that I've been happy, but I sort of can't almost believe that in that moment. And likewise, when I'm really overjoyed, I can't quite believe that I'll ever not be happy again. So our mind creates our whole world. This is what we might talk about if we talk about view. That we're always understanding the world, we're always interpreting the world through our views. So, for example, I've just noticed, particularly talking to friends, talking to family, the world's become quite a different place, it seems, in the last 9 months. It seems suddenly the world's a much scarier place. And although there is an added threat, there's always loads of threat. We can always die unexpectedly. We can always get ill. We can always have a car crash if we're driving. We never know what's going to happen. There is danger, but we probably don't normally relate to the world. At least I haven't normally related to the world as this really, really dangerous place that I need to be careful of, and other people as potential threats. Yeah. I might do it sort of late at night, walking through areas I don't know or something a bit, but normally that's not my experience. But it seems now, however justified it is, I think there's an argument against it being entirely justified, that the world is suddenly a really, really scary place to be in, and other people are scary. So that's a prime example of a view. And if we live our life through that view, then that will reinforce itself, and we will be scared, and the world will be a scary place. So that's one example of how this might operate in our lives. So what we're trying to do in meditation, if we're trying to work on the mind with the mind, is first of all we need to apprehend the mind. We need to apprehend in first order what the view is, what the lens we're experiencing the world through is, and that's so much more of a subtle art than just noticing the bits of the mind that get in the way of the meditation, although they might be helpful as a clue, and I'll come to that. So the experience I find of that is a sort of like a zooming out. It's like the fish realizing that actually he's swimming in water, rather than just sort of going along through this thing all the time. It's like taking a step back and realizing actually there's this thing that I'm completely submerged in, and it's water. Something of an experience of that. It's a widening of the perspective. It's like, I find in meditation, and this is what I'm going to suggest that we try and do in a moment, the most helpful way of doing that is just seeing how you're relating to the meditation, because we're doing that in the present tense. We're doing that right now. We are meditating right now. And so it's possible, in trying to work out what the mind is and what our mind's like, it's very tempting to get into sort of into ideas about what we're like, or psychological ideas, or oh God, what am I like? And that might be awful depending on what your general sense of yourself is, or it might be that I'm brilliant at meditation and nailing it, which is probably a better place to come from. But noticing how we're relating to the meditation is a pretty good way of noticing how our mind works sort of generally. Because the act of meditation, all we're doing is just breathing. We're doing that all the time. We're just stopping doing everything else. And so we're really just seeing what are the shape of our mind, what our habits are, what our assumptions are, what our attitude is to our experience. So what I'm suggesting in meditation is that we've got the technique, if you like, of watching the breath. And Kshantikara helpfully led us through those stages, and we'll do the full mindfulness of breathing practice in a bit. I'll remind us of the stages as we go, very briefly. But we've got the technique, we've got the thing that we're trying to do in the meditation. And my friend Maitreya Bandhu recently said this in a way that I thought was very helpful, where he said, you've got the technique, but it overlaps with your autobiography. It overlaps with all of that you're bringing to it, which is what I'm talking about when I say noticing the mind. We've got a whole autobiography that comes into that might be that we relate to ourselves as really not being very good at something, and so we'll find ourselves doing that in meditation. We might relate to our experiences. We might be really, really driven, so we might really be like, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do this thing, in a way that might be slightly trying to force a particular idea of what our experience should be like. We'll all do it in different ways. I think that in a way we'll all have different particular tendencies for how we do this. We might be sort of really wanting a particular experience and sort of reaching out for it. We might be sitting there sort of furious about something and just sort of bubbling over. We might notice this actually, all of this particularly, one really good moment to notice is when you've been distracted, because that's often our experience in meditation, isn't it? We're trying to watch the breath and we get distracted. So I'd say that's a key moment, not that you've just failed at, but a key moment where you can really learn something about your mind, where you can really apprehend the mind more clearly. Partly because where your mind goes is interesting. Where your mind goes is a clue to what you're preoccupied with. If you're thinking about films you might watch, or really nice food you might eat, there's a sort of desire for pleasure and experience. That's an interesting clue as to where you're at. But I think even more helpfully than that is to notice how you respond to having been distracted. Yeah, so there's this moment, you've been distracted, and then noticing how you respond to that. What's your attitude to that in practicing meditation? And what that attitude is will affect the meditation. That will itself condition your experience in the meditation. So if you get really disappointed because you've been distracted, you're just adding a little sprinkling of disappointment into your meditation. If you feel like, oh, I just really can't meditate, or maybe today's not the day for it, kind of thing, that's gonna prove itself. So very natural, all these things. It's not a problem. This is just how the mind works. But we're in noticing how we respond to being distracted, we are taking that little step back out and just noticing how we are meditating. We're noticing our attitude to meditating. We're noticing our attitude to ourselves as we meditate. It's a difficult thing to talk about. It's a subtle art, this, and I don't think that it's something that one can work out like in a session. It's not a technique. It's the thing that's going on all the time while you're practicing the techniques. It's getting to know yourself. It's getting to know what you're like. And we're doing that in as non-conceptual a way as we can get away with. So what Kshantikara was teaching about was us noticing tightness in the body and trying to let go of that. So you might notice yourself getting distracted and thinking, "Oh damn, I thought I had it," and that's interesting. One response to that, in noticing that, is to be like, "Okay, so I've noticed that I got really disappointed when I got distracted," which is helpful. But you could try and sort of work it out on the level of thought. With what Kshantikara was doing, in terms of just noticing tightness in the body, you can sort of respond to that much more directly. So associated with this disappointed response will be something that's sort of happening in the body. Most likely there'll be a certain kind of tightness somewhere, to do with this sense of like, oh no, I thought I was doing really well. And rather than trying to think it through, by just noticing that and trying to just let go of that tightness, we've both seen a limited tendency of our mind and managed to let go of it a little bit and expand. So to summarise a little bit, our mind is much more embedded in our experience than we might recognise. It's the whole way through which we see the world. So in order to step back, we've got to notice our whole attitude to what we're doing. So here, our whole attitude to meditation. And I won't there's loads of examples of what that might be like. I'll let you work out for yourself what yours are, and they'll be different each day. Noticing your attitude, your assumptions to the meditation practice itself. And in noticing them, just try and notice what that's like in your body as well. What that feels like in your experience to hold that assumption, to relate to your experience in that way. And if they notice any tension in that, we just let go. And then we go back to the technique. We go back to whatever we're doing with the breath. So that was a bit of a whirlwind tour through something quite that takes sort of, in a way, a lifetime's practice to sort of really master, if you ever do. But let's have a go at it in meditation. So in a sec, we'll set up, we'll do the mindfulness of breathing practice. I'll remind us of the stages. And what I'm just suggesting you do is just keep coming back to the breath, keep coming back to the stage, but particularly in the moments when you've been distracted, just really noticing what your immediate response is to that. Where your mind is, what your attitude is like to the act of meditation itself, and seeing if you can just spot that and just relax around it, opening up in the process to a mind that's broader than the mind you're currently aware of or experiencing. So let's get set up. Jahit will turn down the lights and I'll ring the bells for the mindfulness of breathing. So taking a moment just to get settled and comfortable. I find if you shift around a little bit at the beginning, then you can sit still for the rest of the meditation. Finding a posture that is comfortable and upright, where your breath can easily come and go through your whole body. And begin by just tuning back in, as we did earlier, to your immediate experience of yourself here, physical experience, your weight on the seat and on the floor. And noticing any tightness or holding on. Maybe you're gripping a bit in your face. Seeing if you can let your face be soft. Maybe there's a sort of squeezing in your throat. Might be very subtle. You really don't need to do that. Noticing if you're holding your shoulders up tight. Just trying to directly experience what that's like. Can't force ourselves to relax, but we can just draw our awareness close into the experience of tension throughout the shoulders. And experiencing it, you can see that it's something that we're doing, however consciously. And we can just see if we can just stop doing that. And drawing your awareness down into your belly. Letting the belly be soft. And into the thighs and the buttocks. Noticing if you're bracing at all in the thighs. And allowing your awareness just to fill the whole space of your body. Your face and your neck and shoulders, all the way through to your hands and your feet. Broad open awareness. Through which the breath and all of the sensations that ripple out from the breath can be felt. mindfulness of breathing. In the first stage, placing a number at the end of the out breath. If your mind drifts off, just coming back to the breath and starting again at 1. Just clocking your response to having been distracted. In the second stage, placing the number at the beginning of the in-breath. taking an interest in that moment where the in-breath starts. In the third stage, letting go of the counting. And just watching the breath, experiencing the breath through the whole space of the body. Trying to notice how you're holding yourself, how you're holding your attitude to your experience. the final stage, maintaining a broad awareness, but bringing your focus to the point at which the breath enters and leaves the body. Taking pleasure in the subtlety of that sensation. Maintaining a broad awareness while you focus in just helps you to spot the attitude, the inclination of your mind. Just letting go of any effort, letting go of the practice, but just staying sat still with your eyes closed. Letting the effects of the meditation sink in. So opening your eyes when you're ready as we draw the meditation to a close. And we could take a few minutes now, take about 5-minute break, and then Shantikara will join me up here and we'll answer any questions that you've got. So it'd be really interesting to hear, if you write in the chat box, anything, especially from what I've talked about tonight, that you'd like to hear more about or clarification on, and particularly about your own experience. So your own experience in that meditation just then, how you found taking that approach to meditation, of trying to apprehend more of your mind, how you found that, and any questions that you've got around that. So do put them in the chat box, and then we'll come and answer some of them in a few minutes. Hello, welcome back. I can never tell whether we should be welcoming you back or you should be welcoming us back, because we've just sort of moved out of the picture and then back into it. So
yeah, well, welcome back.
Welcome back, us.
Yeah. So thanks very much for your talk and leading us in the meditation. We were just saying in this room how much we enjoyed it and how much sort of nugget of something really, really good it was. I was just saying to Sthiramanas in our little break, like, oh yeah, it'd be really good to take that talk bit out and put that video in lots of places. So I think I really like this way you talked about working on the mind with the mind. And, how to do that, and also how to like hold being distracted and work with it. So now's our chance to ask Sthiramanas some questions. Maybe I'll get involved, we'll see. But I'll certainly take your questions and give them to Sthiramanas. So I was just reading one here from Ritu. We've got about 15 minutes, so do keep typing them in. Got one here from Ritu about their mind drifting and sort of coming into awareness of that and then jolting back into being aware of the breath. So this kind of, you're aware of the breath, then you sort of notice you're distracted, and then you're back on the breath, and it's kind of got a kind of jolt to it. And kind of they've got a sense that isn't the best way to come back. This kind of jolting back, no, meant to come back to the breath. So they're asking, how should you come back? So you're focusing on the breath, you get distracted, you notice, then you've got to bring yourself back to your breath or your experience somehow. They're saying they jolt back and it's not working.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. From the way that you describe it, this sort of jolting, it sounds like, I guess, how would I relate to that if that was my experience? I think I'd be trying to think about what does that sort of feel like? What's that relation to the breath and this act of meditating, this act of coming back to the breath? See, it feels a bit sort of sharp, a bit perhaps a little bit like there's a bit of some sort of, it's a bit anxious. It's like a bit slightly, the sense of slightly nervous about getting it wrong, a slightly, because I think I could relate to this actually, a slightly sort of fearful thing of if you've gone off, no, you're in trouble or something, and you might sort of notice that. So it sounds like there's a bit of extra tension in there, basically, tension in your relationship to the meditation. The opposite of that would be to basically not be caring and you just float off somewhere else, which would be a different kind of problem. But here it feels like maybe it's wound a little bit tight. And until you manage to sort of find a way to spot what that's like, that experience of relating to the meditation in this sort of back on it, I need to be back kind of thing, until you can sort of spot that and see that a bit more, and then relax around that. Until you can do that, your mind will keep bouncing off, because it'll be wound a little bit too tight to really to get concentrated, basically.
I like that metaphor that sometimes comes up of taming a wild horse. I mean, I've never tamed a wild horse, but someone's told me this. Yeah, I've tamed loads of wild horses in my time in London, in Bethnal Green, in Victoria Park, and this idea of you put it on a very, very long leash, and then you slowly make the leash shorter and shorter, in the case of a wild horse, apparently over weeks. But I think you can get that I certainly have that with meditation, so my mind feels like a wild horse, and then I sort of pull the leash back to where it's supposed to be. And then, of course, the wild horse, my mind doesn't really like it very much and is suddenly back Do you know when you kind of get this push and pull?
Because there's like an unreasonable expectation in there, isn't there? The unreasonable expectation is that I should just be on the breath and not going anywhere. And we can't expect that because you've been using your mind to do 100 different scattered things throughout the day. So that tendency is going to be carrying on. So we need to be realistic and not to both the two things would be neither to take the fact that that's happening too personally because it's just the conditions. This is just what's been set up, coming to just carrying on. It's just something objectively you can notice rather than it being something about you. And not to take any sort of worried feeling about that literally. Often if we're feeling a bit worried, we feel like there's something to be worried about, but you don't need to take it literally. It's just, I'm just feeling worried. Not to let that turn into anything else.
And this same person, Ritu, I hope I'm saying it right, it goes on to ask, it's almost like the flip side of this, rather than jolting it back, the other thing they might do is just drift into it all a bit, which it could sound like that was what you were suggesting people do in terms of notice what you're distracted by. You were a bit saying don't do this in terms of keep it in the body, don't go off on the thought, but I guess the question is there space for, so it sounds like Richie's saying they get distracted, they then find themselves distracted, go into it a bit, what am I distracted by? I'm thinking of my mother again, I'm always thinking of my, etc. I guess I'm deliberately trying to use a sort of psychotherapy style, thinking of my mother again, I wonder why I'm thinking of my mother. There is something to that, isn't there, where people pay lots of money to go into that kind of thing or read lots of books about it. So I think there's some kind of question here about, do you go into what you're being distracted by, or do you always just drop it and come back to the breath? It's the same person that's asking about this jolting, so you can see how it's the other side. Yeah,
absolutely it is. It's interesting because, you might, noticing that your mind keeps going on to the same thing is valuable because it says something about, it can teach us something about ourselves. So it might be something that bears a bit of reflection, but it's not going to help if you try and do that in meditation. It's like trying to cook and go for a run at the same time. They're both worthwhile things to do, but they don't really go together. It'd be good. Sometimes it's good after meditation just to sit for a while, and you might have a notebook and write a few notes, or just think for a while about whatever it is that was bothering you in meditation. So that you can sort of give that a bit of space to actually think on. Whereas in the meditation, it's more like, I think you can actually still learn something about it, but you're doing it in a much less conceptual way, much less discursive way, by just noticing the felt experience of it, which is very direct. It's a way of that, it takes you straight out of the thinking, ruminating, and actually gets a bit more up close and personal, with it.
It's interesting as well because it sort of links to this thing of meditation just being part of a life, and you can't just do all the work all the work of the Buddhist life isn't in meditation. I was particularly thinking as you were talking about, as you were saying, taking time to reflect or write about what goes on in meditation, but also, the advantage of having something like the London Buddhist Centre, albeit it's now in a slightly different shape, but just thinking about you, and we're in a chapter together, so on Sunday we are more discursive about what's going on in our minds and where it comes from and how to get to grips with it. But the best of that comes from people's meditation practice, which is this sort of, do you take the time to explore what's coming up in meditation but find a context for it?
Our chapter is just a sort of formal context to talk to friends about our lives. So a real necessity of having friends, people you can relate to about this kind of thing, about what you're uncovering in meditation. Otherwise you're a bit stuck in your own with it.
And then Jenny, who's in the room, you had a question, didn't you, about I'll see if I can rephrase it, and then you can say if I've got it right. Your question seemed to be about you were talking about getting distracted by things and then noticing what's the quality of how you relate to the distraction and what's going on. And what Jenny was just saying is that in a meditation there might be lots going on. You might be anxious, but then you might be tired, but then you might be... So was your question about how do you hold all of that, or which one do you give your creativity to, or what was your question?
Yeah, it was just, given that it changes so very quickly, even within one stage of the mindfulness of breathing, what can we learn from that, or how can we work with that? if it dances around so much.
What the actual issue is, it seems, what your attitude is itself keeps changing through the practice. Yeah, I mean, there's a sort of profound reflection in there on the mind and its impermanence. If you can see that in action, that's really that's potentially a wisdom reflection. In terms of, we assume that right now I'm just really tired, and right now I'm just really worried about that thing or whatever. It's like, and then you might see literally sort of seconds later you're in a completely different space, and the world, albeit internally in the meditation, the world seems very, very different. So I guess even just taking an interest in that, just in the same way as you took an interest in each of the different sort of states as they were happening. Of course, none of them are staying still at any point. Even as you're taking an interest in that, it's just like a broader way of still just looking sort of disinterestedly, sort of playfully almost, just like what's actually sort of going on, and all of that's just sort of pulling it a little bit further away from right up in our face, so that we can relate to it a bit more lightly, we can hold a bit more lightly to it, even if what we're holding more lightly to is a whole variety of stuff. And in doing so, that's part of this whole process of just sort of getting a bit of perspective on our experience.
It's interesting you evoking that, because I think sometimes what can come up is because meditation feels like quite close, or the experience of me is kind of here. I can sort of kind of try and look at it and it's all over the place and I can't quite work out what's going on. And what you're saying is more a kind of open up to the whole kind of, it's a bit all over the place. Okay, maybe I just won't take it so seriously. Or maybe that bit feels serious. But I think that even links to what you're saying about the tightness of, I get quite into this in meditation, and then if I just relax it, get a bit more of a sense of what's going on. Yeah,
it might even be tempting in doing this. I wonder if anyone had this experience with this last meditation, of you're trying to do this exercise where I spot what my mind, my attitude is like, and get frustrated because it keeps changing or something, or you think you might be getting it wrong. Anyway, then you can take another step back and realise that that's what you're doing, that's how you're relating to this. Like potentially it can sort of go back and back and back, and you might get into, it's possible to get in a bit of a state where you're sort of like slightly agonising over it. But that in itself is interesting, and that is something that can be noticed and relaxed around.
Lots of layers. There's one question here from Paul. He's asking, is drifting away in meditation to do with the 5 hindrances? So the 5 hindrances being things like, let's not go through all of them, but anxiety and restlessness, sloth and torpor, craving and ill will and doubt. Actually, let's do them all. So these sort of 5 things that the Buddha talks about traditionally getting in the way of meditation. So I get Paul's asking if that's what the drifting away is. Is it the hindrances that we're sort of distracted by? Is that what sort of stops our relationship with the mind in the way you're talking about? I think that's roughly what's in his question. Yeah. So these 5 hindrances, which again, I won't go into in much detail, are just a neat categorization of the different ways in which a natural, more expansive state of mind is covered up, is sort of blocked from unfolding, whether that be that we're just really anxious, or whether it be that we're busy feeling really grumpy and annoyed at someone, or whatever it is. And we'll each have our different preferences, or at least our things that we naturally find ourselves doing more. We'll probably all do all of them some of the time, but some of us will lean a bit more towards one than the other. I, for example, have a bit more of a tendency towards anxiety, and I've just spent the years that I've been meditating gradually getting to know that better. And even on my recent retreat, I even had this sense of like a sort of hand kind of pulling me up through here, which was a felt experience of that state of anxiety that I was like, I recognise that. And it was like seeing it a bit more clearly. And I've been looking at it for ages and thinking about it and talking about it with people. And it was a moment of seeing it a bit more clearly. And in doing that, it was like I could just be like, maybe I'll just let the hand relax a little bit. And then
was able to relax a bit more deeply around that tendency. So just getting to know what our particular tendencies are like, what it how it manifests, how it affects our relationships with people, through friendship, through discussion, through and in meditation, just what's that actually like, so that in life, outside of meditation, I can just try and keep letting go of it a bit more and letting it get in the way of letting my mind open up more.
It's a good metaphor, isn't it, well, it's just interesting. I'm just listening to you speak, and it's just quite difficult to talk about the whole vision of the mind in one evening.
Yeah.
And these hindrances, these 5 hindrances, again, that's a whole talk on its own right.
Yeah.
I'm sure you can type it in the search box of the London Buddhist Centre and find it these days. But these hindrances covering over the mind, and it even falls into what you were saying in your sort of the main bit of your talk earlier of like, get to grips with how the hindrances affect you. Are you anxious? Does anxiety come up a lot? And then how do you respond to it? Is it a big deal, or is it... Yeah. Do you see an image, or do you, I think it sort of links and folds into what you were saying. There's one more short question and then we should wrap up, but it's from Ritu again, who asked a few questions. So I quite like it actually when the class becomes kind of, if you were in a class, you might be saying, oh, did I answer your question or not? And then no, you didn't actually. Or did you get it? And Ritu is saying, I think you did answer the question, but is a bit confused about... So Ritu was asking about drifting off, noticing kind of what you're drifting to and then coming back. And just for some clarity on what is it that you come back to. What is it you're coming back to? You're distracted, you notice the quality, and then you come back to... And I think we often say your experience, which is a bit abstract, isn't it?
So I guess potentially confusing because we've been talking about two things, haven't we? So we've been talking about the technique, the breath. So... if we're in the third stage, we're just coming back to this experience of the breath in the body. That's the concrete thing that we're coming back to. And I've also been talking about noticing your response, noticing your attitude, and they could seem like two different things. I think there's the skill in this approach would be to try and... That's why I think we're talking about noticing it in the body, because the best thing about the breath is that the breath is a physical experience. It's not we're not looking for an idea of the fact that I'm breathing in and out and in and out. We're looking for the felt experience of that whole sort of wave of sensations through the body. So that will itself be interwoven with whatever tension, holding on, posture, mode that we're in. So by coming straight back to the sensation of the breath, we're also coming into a broad sensation of what our experience is like. Our breath is a really good key to our experience, and we're adding in this with this method a sort of attempt to kind of just see what that's like and what our mind is like. Our breath is a key to our mind in that respect. So hopefully the two things don't need to be as different as they might seem. Not an easy thing to put down and not an easy thing to grasp straight away, but something to keep playing with. If in doubt, just come back to the experience of the breath.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you for joining us. It's been really nice to sort of gather here together, and thanks to David, Jahit and Jenny for making it all sort of happen. There's actually like a serious amount of tech going on at the London Buddhist Centre now. It's not just a laptop with a webcam. There's this camera that you can move around with a remote control and lighting, and this sort of like box that's got us on it. Anyway, so it's very professional. So thank you very much for all of that. This is the new version of the London Buddhist Centre, and often when people came to our classes, we'd be standing at the door with a bowl, and the bowl would have money in it, and I'd be smiling, and I'd hold the bowl, and I wouldn't necessarily ask you to donate, but you'd kind of know that would be a good thing to do. And that's how the centre runs. That's how the London Buddhist Centre runs. Sthiramanas and I are here just as volunteers this evening. We're just giving our time. As it happens, I've quite enjoyed myself, and this is probably the kind of thing we enjoy talking about, but we just give ourselves. You've given us your question and your time, and David, Jahit and Jenny have given their time to get it going. So maybe you could give some money, you could donate some to the London Buddhist Centre using the link in the chat and underneath. That'd be great. And it'd be also really good for you to just keep joining in with the London Buddhist Centre. So again, this is the moment in an in-person class where I said, come back next week. So do come back to this next week. I think Sthiramanas will be here, but Jayaka will be doing the kind of main bit of the class on the breath and reality, the way things are. So come back for that. And particularly though next week on Thursday we've got 2 things starting. So one is what we're calling a pop-up online retreat, which I was looking at the programme today in an email. Possibly you were probably involved in making that email, weren't you, Sthiramanas? It was a very good email. It looked very exciting. So there's this pop-up retreat Thursday to Sunday next week. Really exciting teachers and really good programme. I'd really encourage you to join in. But even leading up to this kind of pop-up lockdown online retreat, just to use the kind of key words, there's lots going on before it. So starting Monday, there's various things leading up to this kind of event, this pop-up retreat. So just go on to the London Buddhist Centre's website and see what's going on next week in relation to this pop-up retreat. It'd be a really good thing to join in with and meet other people and go a bit deeper into meditation and Buddhism. And then also on Thursday, if you're newer to the London Buddhist Centre, Surya Gupta and Akasha Mitra are going to be leading a 4-week Introduction to Buddhism and Meditation course. So that starts on Thursday too. So if you're newer, that might be better for you than the pop-up retreat. If you don't have that much, you've kind of got a basic understanding of meditation and Buddhism, then you could join Surya Gupta and Akasha Mitra, and you'd also get to know other people and learn a bit more about those. So there's lots going on at the London Buddhist Centre, so I'd really encourage you to join in and to donate some money if you can.
You could even do both. You just have to miss the first evening.
Oh, you can do both. So you can do the pop-up retreat, but start it by doing the first evening of an introduction course. So yeah, do come back, and thanks for joining us. And we'll leave it there.
Let's leave it there.
Have a good week. Great.
You done? Great.
Thank you. Well done.